Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this final show of the season on Book Bites. I'm your host, Shafinaaz Hassim, and I have absolute pleasure in outlining what a great season it's been for the book industry, and with that, a whole year into lockdown. We had the Time of the Writer Festival since the last time we spoke on the show, and it had a really wonderful energy generated as always, but even more so being on a virtual platform. Our special guest today is the current festival director of the show, and we'll be talking more about that. In Gauteng earlier this week, we also had the final awards for the NIHSS, the Social Sciences Awards, with some wonderful local talent showcased there. And we have hopefully more to look forward to during the course of the year. We will be taking a break during Ramadan, but we're not going out without a really fantastic program lined up for this evening. Our special guest this evening is the Honorable Dr. Ismail Mahomed. With more than 30 years in cultural leadership, Ismail Mahomed is currently the director, as I said, of the Center for Creative Arts at UKZN. He is the festival director of Time of the Writer and other festivals through CCA. He was previously the CEO of the Market Theatre, a foundation artistic director of the National Arts Festival in Grahamstown, and senior cultural specialist at the U.S. Embassy. He was awarded the Special Merit Award for consistently high cultural programming from the U.S. State Department for the Africa Bureau. And the government of France awarded him multiple national merit awards. The Knight's Order for Arts and Literature in 2016, and the National Order of Merit a few weeks ago for 2021. I'm not even going to attempt to say that in the French. He serves on the boards of several cultural organizations in South Africa. He was also awarded for Best Cultural Program for the Jomba Arts Festival at last week's awards, the NIHSS Awards in Gauteng. It gives me such great pleasure to welcome Ismail Mahomed to the show. Thank you so much for giving us your time this evening.
Thank you very much, Shafinaaz. It's wonderful chatting to you, and I've been following your program, so thank you very much for the invitation.
Well, it's such a pleasure, especially to have an opportunity to, in a small way, celebrate what a great legacy you've been building and creating, and continue to generate so much of energy for us in the arts in various ways, especially through such a difficult time through the pandemic. Speak to us. Firstly, congratulations on all of these awards that are continual, and I know an avalanche more to come. Um, um, but this pandemic, a year of pandemic, what has that meant for the arts industry?
Sure, thank you very much. I mean, all those awards doesn't come, without being able to build that on the back of the various people that you work with. And I'm incredibly fortunate to have worked with some superb artists, writers, poets, musicians during my career. Last year, as soon as the pandemic the lockdown was announced, it happened just a day or two before the Time of the Writer Festival was supposed to take place at the UKZN in Durban. And it literally meant that within 2 days, we had to rethink that entire festival and to go online. And this has been a global phenomenon that across wherever you are on the planet Earth, that every single festival, whether it's a literature festival, theatre festival, music festival, dance festival, or even a film festival, had to be cancelled because you could not assemble as people in an auditorium. So the online space became an incredibly dynamic space through which you were able to engage with our audiences, but also with artists. And
Sure.
while it doesn't have the intimacy that you normally have in a physical, real life, one-on-one interaction with somebody, there have been incredible benefits out of the online engagement, in the sense that we've been able to traverse and touch base with audiences that we otherwise would not have been able to do. And just to give you an example, that last year if we had to open for Jamba, which is our annual contemporary dance festival, we would have been able to play to a maximum 400 people because that's the capacity of the venue. But through an online opening, on the opening night alone, we were able to reach out to about 900 plus people. And that's people from across our borders on the continent, as well as Europe and the Americas. So there have been incredible spin offs out of uh, this situation. And I don't think that post the lockdown, that everyone would rush back into the kind of physical spaces. I think the online space is here to stay, and that we will begin to have hybrid festivals, that some of our events will be presented in real time, in real spaces, as one-on-one events. But there would be a series of events that would still remain on the online space.
I think it's fantastic to hear that because, yes, last year it was like everything was kind of shocking, and a lot of festivals shut down in our faces just at the beginning of the industry's time of engagement. And also at the same time, I mean, I've been there when you were the artistic director of the National Arts Festival, and there's such a hive of activity. Time of the Writer generates exactly the same kind of freshness and the amazing interaction with authors, and you want to be able to, even as an author or as a audience member, you want to be able to interact with authors, have a cup of coffee afterwards and chat about those sessions. So we still want that interaction, but it's amazing that, yes, we have been able to engage a far wider variety of book clubs and members, not just from within Durban or South Africa, but literally everywhere around the world. I had book clubs from Polokwane who had logged into the sessions at Time of the Writer 2 weeks ago, and was so amazed because they're so committed to their literacy and their reading and that sort of thing. So thank you for that spark that you also brought into the space that's already so well curated. Um, but the challenges as well. I mean, we speak about what's good and what's happening and what potential there is for the future. But what has really happened with artists? Because I mean, has there been a good sense of support both from big business, from the cultural sector, and from government?
Well, there have been various challenges at that level. Whilst we've seen a great deal of artists presenting online work, the one thing that's not happened successfully, although we've been able to introduce them to new and unfamiliar audiences, it's not yet a system that is monetized. So, very few artists would be able to earn any kind of income from the kind of online work. With the festivals that we present at the Center for the Creative Arts, we've tried to make sure that every artist that performs on our platforms does receive a nominal fee for the hour of work that they are presenting. But generally, with the closure of all festivals and all live events, the majority of artists in our country have been without work for an entire year. And that's incredibly scary when you consider that the majority of them work on a freelance basis. So they don't have medical aid, they don't have the other benefits that comes across, when you have freelance work. Those of us who work in the administrative and the management system of the arts are a lot more fortunate in the sense that, we continue working uh, in the virtual space, whether we're organizing events or festivals in the virtual space, we still do earn our salaries. But the artists themselves are in a crisis. And although the government has had an artist relief fund through the Department of Arts and Culture,
Okay.
it's been chaotic. One, in the sense that it's not been strategic. The first round required artists to have things like tax clearance forms, contracts. And we know that the majority of artists, even when they do freelance work, often do so on goodwill. So they didn't have contracts of cancellation and so forth to be able to claim from the Artist Relief Fund. But what followed after the Artist Relief Fund was the Presidential Economic Stimulus Plan. And for the arts itself, there was 300 million rands put aside through the Department of Arts and Culture, which is going to be administered through the National Arts Council. And what we've seen is absolute chaos. That fund was made available in October for artists. Uh, it was, through the DAC and the National Arts Council. What's unraveled over the last 2 months is that there's been no system or no strategy through which that fund has been administered. So there have been multiple payments made to people. There have been fraudulent payments in some cases, but also
Oh,
some
wow.
cases which are incredibly illegal in the sense that the National Arts Council Act, which is a statutory act, states that no member who serves on the board may qualify for a grant in the year that they serve on the board. And what we've seen is 5 members of the board claiming substantial sums for themselves. We've seen one particular artist who's allegedly claimed, up to a total of 11 million rand towards his family. So whilst artists have been going hungry and artists are hoping to benefit out of this particular fund, the level of deep corruption that seeped into our country and which has become the zeitgeist of our nation, unfortunately, even seeped right into this emergency fund for artists, and that artists have not been able to see the full benefits of government support. As a result, what we've seen over the last 32 days is a number of artists led by the opera singer Sibongile Ngoma, who have occupied the offices of the National Arts Council. They've been sleeping there and they've been protesting. And what they've been also doing is going through various documents to unravel the levels of corruption through which this fund has been administered. And I think a great deal of the problem for that is the fact that South Africa has an incredibly embarrassing Minister of Arts and Culture, Nathi Mthethwa, the same man who was responsible for Marikana, who should never be anywhere near government after the incidents of Marikana. To be placed as head of the arts and culture section is a total disrespect for artists, but more so, it's a total disrespect for a nation, because there isn't a single nation in the world that doesn't reflect its soul and its spirit through its music, through its dance, through its poetry, through its literature. And if you take away a nation's poetry, its music, its dance, its film, you just have people. You don't have a nation. You don't have an identity. You don't have a sense of belonging. And we unfortunately have made this terrible mistake in our new democracy, where we have the most liberal constitution that in section 16 provides us with freedom of expression and freedom of creativity. But we've never had a Minister of Arts and Culture that has been celebratory of that constitutional principle in our country.
That's extremely frustrating to hear of, because on the one hand, you think that government is showing this idea of trying to make things easier, trying to help, and then you hear of large sums of money literally being lost through deviant means. And 32 days, standing at the Arts Council and not being heard is actually unacceptable, completely unacceptable. Because they're speaking up rightfully so against corruption. And obviously, what choice do they have? Because our artists must eat and our artists must have a roof over their heads. And yes, because our cultural discourse and every country's cultural discourse is driven by the art sector. The arts has carried us through the pandemic. We have no doubt about that. You know,
Absolutely.
um, what is your vision for this? Because I mean, it shouldn't have taken so long. I know recently the Minister of Arts and Culture sent out a sort of a document saying that there should be a sense of Ubuntu and artists shouldn't be evicted from their homes. But then there's this big sort of gaping void here because he's not dealing with the big issue of where did the money go. It's not the artists that the artists shouldn't be punished for this state of corruption. And how does he plan to resolve this as soon as possible?
Well, I think the fundamental problem is that the minister does not have a plan. And that's tragic. And I think it's even more tragic when one considers that our liberation struggle in our country wasn't just fought by people who were underground or exiles who were fighting from across our borders, or those of us who managed to march and go to protest meetings. Our artists have fought our liberation struggle through their poetry and their poetic expressions. That when we went through the most severe state of emergency in our country in the 80s, when there was a great deal of repression and censorship, where the newspapers were not able to tell us what was happening, where the media, where television had just been introduced in 76, and radio was controlled by the apartheid state. It was works presented on the stages, for example, of the Market Theatre in Johannesburg, productions like Sarafina, Warsaw Albert, Assi Namali, Athol Fugard's works, SarahEssa's works, Ronnie Govinder's works, Kessie Govinder's works, and I could go through a whole range of artists who presented political works and were able to inform us of what was happening in the townships and in our suburbs and with apartheid. But at the same time, they were also able to challenge the apartheid state and create a global awareness of what was happening in our country under the repressive apartheid regime. And post 1994, when we got into what is our Rainbow Nation and of reconciliation and so forth, it really was the arts that began to be the glue that held our society together, because the arts has the ability to heal. There isn't a single child that grows up without sitting on his mum's lap and listening to a song, or without sitting on his granny's lap and being rocked like a dancer. There isn't a single child that doesn't listen to his grandfather's stories as he grows up. So the arts is very intrinsic to our lives from the time we're born and we grow up. And of course, we learn to express ourselves in different ways, and we learn to experience it in different ways. And that in the healing of our country, the arts played a very crucial role. And if you just began to take the pandemic that we had with HIV/AIDS, and the role that artists played in creating awareness about, risky behavior, but also around, the stereotype, about challenging stereotypes and about, tolerance and so forth. Just over the last number of years, we've seen how many plays and how many novels have been written about one of the biggest scourges in our country, which is gender-based violence. So the artists have been really agents of social change in South Africa. They heal, but they don't heal like doctors in a surgery. They heal us in different ways, in that they touch our nerves, they touch our heart, they touch every part of our living, of our lives, and that we cannot for one moment say that we are not moved by the arts in any way. Anyone who's exposed to the arts comes out a different individual. And I think one of the crucial things that we're seeing now is that even boardrooms of the corporate sector are beginning to see the value of the arts. That they use wonderful words like creative problem solving, which essentially is let's role play,
Right.
as we do in acting. Let's role play and find a solution to that. So the arts is not just that product; it's a process as well, and it's becoming so much more part of our economy. Because if we take what the arts does, that it stabilizes our society, because it allows us, if we just take, for example, the violent past that we've come through, but by being able to tell stories and being able to read books and listen to poetry, we have a deeper understanding of our humanity. We have a deeper understanding of the tragic past that we've come from and how much we've achieved over the last 25 years in our country. And to think that when we got into this crazy pandemic and the artists could no longer work, that the state would have found more effective ways to be able to support the artists, whether that was being able to assist artists to go onto online platforms, because we saw across the globe a sudden influx of online festivals, online events. And, that's where artists needed to be supported. But what we've also seen is not just the artists being heard through the bad planning and through funds that have gone astray. We've seen theatres close down. For example, the Fugard Theatre in Cape Town, which is so tied with our history, established right there in the heart of Cape Town, that celebrated that legacy of District 6 and rose like a phoenix in defiance against apartheid when apartheid had ended, and was able to give people a sense of belonging and celebration of where they'd come from. And it's closed down last year. It mothballed last year and closed down at the beginning of this year simply because it received no support from the state. We've seen companies like Just Sets, which provides a great deal of work for designers, architects, set builders, carpenters, and so forth, who work in the theatre, film, and television industry. That company's closed down, both its branches in Gauteng and in Cape Town. Now, what this means is that if our theatres are closing down, if companies like Just Sets are closing down, if other performing arts companies are closing down, if we get out of this pandemic, where to do artists go to for work? If teachers will go back to schools, doctors will go back to the hospitals, accountants will go back to their firms. But where do artists go to when the places that provide them with their job opportunities have shut down? So there's been a complete lack of vision on the part of government in terms of the way they've responded to the art sector in this crisis.
We're logging huge losses, when I hear you speak, and I've seen a lot of it on social media where there's been this desperate need to assist each other in the space, to assist artists. I mean, in the book industry, you're still getting ebooks being sold, online sales and that sort of thing. And even though it was a challenge in the beginning, there has been an upsurge. And definitely we can see that art and the arts it's not easy to quantify and to put a sort of way, as you said, to capitalize and to pay artists. But at the same time, so the onus is not just on us in the arts industry, but also on big business, on communities, and on government at different structures. We all have this responsibility to not lose the arts, to not have it seep into sort of the drains of time, even through the pandemic. I really, I want to also display this message quite clearly, that we all have a responsibility to hold on to our cultural heritage in various forms because of those building bridges, because of the legacy over the centuries, not just, pre and post apartheid. And that kind of sort of gold that's being lost through this pandemic. And especially also this idea that in a time of a pandemic, that there's a kind of vulture, this vulture feeling of like, let me see what I can get out of this, and it's wholly pathetic. Whether it's about food security or the art sector and kind of saving our art sector. So I hear you completely, and I hear your frustration, and you've been in the industry for so many years, working at such a at a very very sort of in a space where you can make those negotiations happen, and still you're dealing with standing side to side with people not on the same page necessarily. We can do whatever we can in every little way to support this sort of revolution of space, to re-engage consciousness from that space. What do you think we can do?
Well, I think, sometimes it's not about being able to throw money at artists. Sometimes it's just about showing solidarity in different ways. Picking up a book and reading, and making sure that that book circulates, so that more people become aware of an author's work. Picking up a piece of music, and avoid things like copying and plagiarism. We photocopy and we make recordings, because with every single book that we photocopy, we're depriving an author of royalties and income. with every piece of music that we tape record, or we try to copy in different ways without paying for it, we really are taking bread out of a musician's mouth. So I think it's about, not just about during the pandemic, but it's year round. That how can we support our arts people? Because when a theatre closes down, it's not just the theatre and the actors and the directors of that particular show that are going to be without work. We've seen how a theatre has a concentric circle of services that also work around it. For example, the car guards will lose their money because nobody's going to come to that particular venue. The coffee shop that exists outside the theatre, the restaurants that exist in the precincts, are going to shut down because the theatre has shut down now. The cleaners lose their work. The people that would come and do maintenance of lighting and sound would lose their work. So it has a multiplier effect on not just the artistic community, but on a range of service providers who are not necessarily artistic, but who benefit from the arts indirectly.
So there's a whole ecosystem.
Absolutely.
There's a whole ecosystem that either benefits or loses out based on that focal point of the arts.
Absolutely.
Well, more than that, I want to also place out a challenge, because when we talk about, buy local, save local, the kind of political and economical economic slogans that get thrown up about, let's bring it back to the arts industry and say, well, the arts industry is not just about making someone feel good or entertainment that has no value, because there has to be some remuneration for the labor of it. But at the same time, there's also this general idea, and I've heard this even when I travel to festivals outside of the country, that we tend to enjoy more what comes from outside the country. We tend to value more what comes from outside the country before we value what is around us and from within our spaces. And there's a kind of, I don't want to call it self-hatred, but there's a kind of lack of belief that we're capable of value. Is that something psychological? I don't know. So my challenge is, we need to enjoy and value more of what's around us. We need to build value and enjoy value from amongst us and from what's around us. Read local, buy local authors, watch locally made movies and local music, for that matter, and engage local material just as much as what's out there internationally. We've had some amazing local productions, and our awards festivals are definitely seeing it. It's just that the scope of broader society needs to be brought in. We're 50 million people, and we can really be holding hands on this and making something of it in the various media spaces.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is, until we don't begin to introduce the arts as a curriculum subject in the schools, we'll always be looking to the outside world to offer us what we think is better. For example, if you take the US elections this year, the presidential installation, Amanda Gorman, the poet, rocked the world. And of course, she rocked South Africa. And everyone was talking about Amanda Gorman's poem at the presidential inauguration. But we have competitors to Amanda Gorman in our country.
Absolutely.
There's Vangile Gansho. There's Natalia Molibatsi. I could name so many more who write incredibly powerful poems and whose voices are celebrated across the globe, but they're unknown to some sectors in South Africa. And that is because our schools don't celebrate them and don't talk about them. And until schools begin to create sections in their library that are not ghetto sections where they say, okay, South African writers in that little corner, but that South African writers and South African poets become a central part of the library collection. And until every classroom begins to say, who is our South African author for this week or for this month, we will always believe that the best authors and the best writers and the best poets come from across the other parts of the globe. And I think what we've seen, those of us that work in the arts sector, is that, until 1992, where we had a cultural boycott, an international cultural boycott of South Africa, we were forced by that cultural boycott to be able to create our own artistic voice in South Africa. So our poetry, our music, our dance, our theater has a particular vocabulary, but it also has a particular style. And that post 1994, when the boycott had ended and South African work could travel overseas, we saw how the world had suddenly been in awe and was buying so much of what was South African, because they could not believe that with the cultural isolation that we really could create something so very, very unique. But even post-apartheid, we were able to do that. If one simply considers the song Jerusalem and what a phenomenon that song has become, and one begins to ask the question, why would a song like Jerusalem become such a hit during the pandemic? And there's a very simple answer to that, because it was the one song that allowed us to still function as a group, but still be socially distanced. Because in every group dance of Jerusalem, there was a 1 meter gap from each other. And we could work as a team, we could work in a choreographed motion. It's exactly what we wanted. We wanted that social interaction, that social networking, the need to be with people in a group. And Jerusalem gave that to us. And this is why it became such a phenomenon in every part of the globe where the national lockdown was taking its impact on people, that you could come out into an open space, or you could come out into a large hall and with 15 or 20 people still take part in a group activity and still make sure that you're not touching anyone, that you're not breathing into anyone's face, and that you're able to move and be one, even as a group. And there's so many examples like that I could quote, where the arts gives us that opportunity to re-examine our humanity, but also to redefine and to find our humanity in crisis like that.
Ismail, thank you so much for giving us such valuable insights. And I really hope that, whoever's watching, and especially appealing to our local governments and our Department of Education and our Department of Arts and Culture, to really rise to the occasion and to make up for the losses, and, to show that it's not, the entirety that's part of the corruption, but really focused on making a better way forward for holding on to our legacies and to create a better way forward. We really appreciate your time.
Sure.
I hope to see a lot more from your pen. I know that you're a playwright and you're a published playwright at that, but also that there's these beautiful memoirs that you've been penning on social media that we hope to see in print form. Is there any chance of that in the near future?
Well, over the last month and a half, I've been writing a daily letter to Natim Tetwa, the Minister of Arts and Culture, in a blog called Educating Natim Tetwa. And I've had lots of requests from people wanting to put that into a book form, largely because it would serve as a cultural documentation of what's happened in this particular period, but also as a record of our cultural history. I will continue writing. At the present moment, I'm quite focused on developing the festivals at the Center for the Creative Arts, and we are going to be introducing 2 new festivals. We run 4 very successful festivals, which have been built up over the last 25 years. But we are introducing a new festival this year in April and one in May. And I'm particularly excited about the one in May because it is a festival that looks at the intersection between the arts, our constitution, and democracy. And it will allow us to be both reflective and celebratory of the role that artists play in a democracy, and how we take full advantage of the constitutional rights that we have in our country. So yes, I will continue writing, at the present moment, just on the blogs and on social media and so forth. But I do intend putting the works in a book form probably later this year or early next year.
Well, we definitely look forward to that. And we also want to see, I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but the Chronicles of Auntie Fatma that you write about, because those are quite a cultural document and a historical one as well. So there's a lot of homework out there, but we know you have your hands full doing the best that you can with so many of the festivals. Particularly, I noticed at Time of the Writer, you brought the performing arts and the literary artists together in such a beautiful way, never seen before on particularly that platform. So I wish you all the best as you continue with this, and strength through some of the greater challenges. But I know that if anyone is capable at the helm of such things, then we're in good hands if you're there.
Thank you
All the best, and we hope to speak again very, very soon. Thank you for your time.
very much. Thank you. All the best to you.
And so there you have it. We wrap up with Book Bites Season 3. There'll be a break during Ramadan, and we wish all our viewers everything of the best through the glorious month, and hope to see you soon afterwards with the best of local, in the arts industry, our local fiction and literature. Assalamu alaikum.